On 21st December, French authorities detained a chartered flight carrying 303 passengers, mostly of Indian origin, from the United Arab Emirates to Nicaragua at the Chalons-Vatry airport on suspicions of human trafficking. While the passengers were later deported to India on the 26th of December, this is not the first such flight carrying Indian passengers to the Central American country with the hope of these Indians emigrating to the US. As reported by ThePrint earlier, at least 3 other flights on the 15th, 16th, and the 20th of December carried passengers of unknown origin from UAE to Nicaragua via France. As per Customs and Border Patrol data from the United States of America, during the financial year of 2023, which is from the 1st October 2022 to 30th of September 2023, they encountered 96,917 Indians attempting to enter the United States irregularly through 2 land borders, specifically the Canadian border as well as the Mexican border. The highest number of Indians was met at the southern border, the Mexican border, where roughly 41,770 encounters was made available according to data from the Customs and Border Patrol. To explain this nature of migration to the US, today, ThePrint has Dr. Manuel Orozco, the Director of Migration, Remittances and Development at the Inter-American Dialogue. Welcome, Doctor, to ThePrint.
Thank you.
My first question, and this stems from reports that you have written as well as other places where you've given interviews, is this recent phenomena of flights being chartered to reach Nicaragua. From a recent report, I think that you had published in November 2023, roughly 60,000 passengers from Haiti and Cuba were carried in 4 months from August to October 2023. And we've also seen roughly 400,000 Cubans since 2021 to 23 use this Nicaragua route to reach the United States of America. So I just wanted to understand, now with chartered flights, carrying Indian passengers to Managua, the capital of Nicaragua, why has this become a new staging route for individuals seeking to irregularly emigrate to the United States?
Well, fundamentally, the main issue is that Nicaragua, the Nicaraguan government of Daniel Ortega, has weaponized migration as a tool against the United States. This is a political issue for Daniel Ortega, who is basically someone who has ruled Nicaragua practically since 1979 and has an ideological controversy, an ideological dislike to the United States. And he finds the use of migration as a way to counterattack the United States. It has allowed the country basically to be a transshipment point for different nationalities. The Indian are the most recently known nationality. However, this is a pattern that goes back at least to 2 years for the transshipment of Cubans with direct flights, charter flights from Haiti, as well as from other countries coming into Nicaragua and then doing the trek into the United States. Most of it is as a way to increase the pressure on the US over a surmounting migration crisis that now, from 2020 to today, amounts to 9 million people.
Right. And in a recent report that, again, the Dialogue released in November, it was mentioned that from the 1990s to the present day, that there has been a shift in the profile of those individuals attempting to emigrate to the United States. In the 1990s, it was mentioned it was mostly single adult Mexican males, but today we see a large number of families, unaccompanied minors. In fact, I think there has been a huge increase of unaccompanied Indian minors that the Customs and Border Patrol has encountered at both the Canadian and the Mexican borders in the last year. So if you could just explain, what are the reasons for this changing patterns and how did this come to be?
The nature, the scale, and the composition of migration has been changing predominantly since the post-global recession crisis. And it grew in more density since the post-pandemic period, since 2020, basically. But what you see is a combination of factors where the intention to migrate becomes a more complex phenomenon, where people's decisions to migrate are not determined simply by economic or humanitarian or political reasons, but you have a combination of factors going on. So one of the trends is that basically the number of people that have arrived on irregular status has increased in large numbers. Again, you don't see these numbers since 2020, since 2019 to the present compared to any other point in time back to the 1990s, where migration was a significant numbers. We're talking about 3 million people every year arriving to the US border with Mexico. But in addition to that, it's not only the scale of migration, but also the composition of it. One of them is that it's no longer Mexican and Central American migrants, which are the closest countries to the US border, migrating, but also you see people from other nationalities, people from the Caribbean, from South America, and then a large influx, at least 25% of all migration to the US border comes from what we call extracontinental places. Places like India, Sri Lanka, Nepal, but also other countries from Africa, as well as from Europe, including Ukraine. The largest trend of migration to the US in the past 4 years has come predominantly from Russian and Ukrainians, especially since 2021. Then you do have this other phenomenon, is that the composition of migration is not just by the multiplicity of nationalities, but also by the type of people that are arriving. You're no longer seeing single adults, but 1 out of 3 migrants are family groups. In the case of Central American and Mexicans, it's 50%. But for the most part, the global nature of migration is no longer an individual seeking opportunities, but it's family groups migrating in large numbers. And then you have the nature of it. And the determinants, again, are a complex mixture of factors. Economic ones may be the common denominator, but you also see significantly an important feature, and is that migration is coming predominantly from fragile states, countries where the rule of law has become a problem. So you have Venezuela, you have Ukraine, you have Russia, you have Nicaragua. Nicaragua has a significant number of migrants. Since 2018, the political crisis in the country, they have 800,000 people living in that country, a country of 6.5 million people. So the magnitude, the density of this is associated to political state fragility issues. Haitian migration, with the collapse of the Haitian state since 2010, has been driving a lot of people out. But outside of the Western Hemisphere, the same pattern is observed. And Indian migration might be characteristic of that feature, with an increase predominantly since 2019 of irregular entries into the United States.
Right, and just coming to that, according to data, which you have sort of provided to me, it seems that there's over 200,000 Indians since August 2020 who's attempted to irregularly immigrate to the United States, which is much higher than regular immigration, which the numbers are somewhere between 20 to slightly higher than 20,000. Right. So, from your experience in studying these patterns, what could be the possible reasons as to why there has been a steady increase in the last 3 years, specifically, of people from India holding Indian passports looking to immigrate to the US via Central America or via Canada? Right. What are the possible reasons from your experience studying these patterns?
Yeah, Indian migration is somewhat unique in the sense that it's the nationality that exhibits the most diasporic, the more dispersed pattern of migration. Migration from India has occurred basically since independence, and it has gone predominantly to the Commonwealth. However, the increase of migrants into the United States is a new phenomenon. From 2010 to 2022, you see an increase of more than 1 million people, from 2 million Indians in the United States to more than 3 million by 2023. 10% of that is irregular migrants arriving into the US. What factors explain this? I think it's a combination of things. One may be the trend that since 2018, the number of non-immigrant visas provided to Indians has been declining from 1 million non-immigrant visas, mostly tourist visas, to 700,000 last year and just a little close to 800,000 this year. So that decline perhaps has been compensated by the increase of irregular migrants seeking to reunite with their families in the United States. But it also coincides with political conditions in India since 2019 with the new government, the re-election of President Modi. There has been a concern over the concentration of power, and that may fuel for the intention to migrate. The economic factor is not the underlying one, but you see a combination of elements: family reunification, the political environment in the homeland, and the look into the United States for economic opportunities is something that you cannot underestimate. With the fact that since the pandemic, the unemployment rate has actually declined basically to nearly 3% unemployment, there is a demand for foreign labor that has been satisfied significantly over the past 3 years. So these factors have come in place to explain Indian migration.
Right. And I just wanted to understand, because this is the phenomena of the Central American route. There are essentially two routes. One is Colombia, Panama, the Darien Gap, and the second is Nicaragua. But nevertheless, what from either of these two countries, Panama or Nicaragua, what is next steps that the migrants take, right? There have been reports that they have to take a bus to the border of Honduras and then from there to Guatemala, right? So how does this process of migration work through the Central American route to Mexico?
Yeah, it's a complex transition from the port of arrival, whether it's Managua or whether it is Bogota, Colombia, or Lima, Peru. The people, especially from non-Western Hemisphere countries, arriving to different countries. They were coming from Colombia, they were coming from Lima, from Quito, Ecuador, from Brazil, and then going through the Darien Gap and eventually to the United States. The trek is a complicated one because it's marred by difficult terrain, but also by problems with drug trafficking organizations that sometimes kidnap and extort people for money. It's a dangerous trek, but mostly people go by bus. They hire a guy to take you all the way to the Mexican border. The most dangerous part of the trek is in Mexican territory, where some of the drug cartels operating in combination with other organized criminal networks that deal with sometimes with human trafficking, sometimes with the smuggling of weapons, among other things. So people expose themselves to the risk of being harmed during the process. Most people, of course, are not affected by this, and the individual basically weighs the risk of not migrating against taking a chance for 20 days, which is more or less the amount of time that it takes to arrive at the US border to basically present themselves at the Mexican-US border.
Right. And my final question to you is, now that someone has presented themselves to the US-Mexican border, right, what is the legal procedure that then happens? Because, I mean, in India, we've seen many stories over the years. There was that case of children in cages and separated from their parents, right? There's a lot of information. But if you could just explain, what are the actual procedures that occurs once an irregular migrant arrives at the US-Mexican border?
Yes, the law basically has a process to identify a categorization of the individual that arrives. You're considered inadmissible, you're considered apprehended and deported, or you're considered someone who will be expelled. And depending on the claim that people make when they arrive at the border without a visa for entry the United States, they will be considering any of those categories. The individuals that present themselves claiming seeking political asylum are in the majority of cases released into the US territory with what is called a notice to appear before a court, an immigrant court, to determine whether the claim the person is making it's acceptable to go through the asylum request process. And so some of them are not allowed. 2/3 of migrants who have arrived, especially from many of these nationalities, are immediately deported or expelled out of the US border with Mexico. The rest who is released is given the chance to make the claim, and some of them are sometimes told that they don't have a claim, a legitimate claim to be considered for asylum. So you see a combination of dynamics going on. It varies from nationality to nationality. Immigrant judges determine if you are eligible for applying for asylum.
Right. And that's sort of my last question, Dr. Orozco. So thank you so much for joining in with ThePrint to discuss this highly complicated issue, which now seems to have an increasing number of Indians also a part of the larger issue of migration that the United States is facing, and that impact on on U.S. domestic politics as well, given that we're entering an election year and it seems to be on everyone's mind on how to solve this migration issue. Right, Doctor. Thank you so much for your time.